You played with Gareth Bale. How good was he?
Yeah, he was...
Our guest is Hal Robson-Kanu.
What is it about you, Hal, that has made you?
I think my personal journey always was faced with adversity. Like, I suffered adversity in the release from Arsenal, adversity suffering major surgeries, major injuries on my ACL. I had to recover naturally from major injuries and surgeries, and was hampered with chronic inflammation. Was told that I would always live with pain. That blend is essentially what allowed me to recover from acute pain. But what I then began realizing was throughout my career, I would recover quicker than my teammates.
Talk us through the quarter-final goal.
Wow, it defies description, really. That was a mixture, I think, of you being a centre forward and a winger. Would that be fair?
I think that's a good assessment.
Because you had your strength. And poor Thomas Meunier, I bet he never watches it again.
Exactly. When you look at the statistics, there's over 23 million people in the UK who live with pain at any given time. And actually, it's almost just accepted as the norm.
That's just their partner.
Yeah.
Hi gang, today's The Joy of Football is brought to you in partnership with CVERsports, the home of digital sport, health and fitness content that's innovative, inclusive and properly useful. And they'll be interested in today's guest, Hal Robson-Kanu, who has built a career as fulfilling post-football as in football with his health drink. Also coming up, Martin Tyler's letter from the gantry, football without VAR in 2026, the FA Cup, 4th round. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello. The Joy of Football podcast is 98 episodes old today with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. And we've got a guest. But before we get on to him, I'd just like to refer you to a comment recently from one of our listeners, viewer, obviously in this case, Mark Hopperton, who says, "Spy, you're great, but lose the hat, mate. It's shit and not you." Thank you, Mark. I have lost it. I had eye surgery and I had to wear shades, and the hat kind of went with it.
I like the hat.
Yeah, it was the old spy in the camp thing at Chelsea. Yeah.
Sorry, Mark, you were wrong.
Yeah.
But
There used to be a publicity thing back in the 60s, 70s, get a head, get a hat. Mark, get a life. Our guest is Hal Robson-Kanu. He is a young man who already has gone through being rejected by Arsenal, dropped from their academy at the age of 15, suffering 2 consecutive ACL ruptures, anterior cruciate ligament ruptures, part of the Wales team that qualified for its first major finals since 1958 and 2016, and then scoring the go-ahead goal against Belgium in the quarterfinals, which got them through to the semi-final.
I was there.
You were commentating.
It's a truly wonderful goal.
And now, as you can see, the creator of a new company, the Turmeric Company, which is a health drink or a series of health drinks based on turmeric. Hal, what has been the most life-changing experience of your life?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me, both of you. It's a pleasure to be here. I would say life-changing for me, obviously that moment in Lille, 2016 was life-changing. But in order to actually get there, I had to recover naturally from major injuries and surgeries, and was hampered with chronic inflammation. Was told that I would always live with pain. And so, my biggest accomplishment for my personal endeavors is, coming back from major surgery and creating what is now, as you said, a company which is available to all different people in all different walks of life. So,
what is it about you, Hal, that has made you strong enough, both physically and mentally, to go through all these downs and bounce back up again Did you realise how determined you were at an early age? Was the Arsenal experience something that set it off?
Yeah, I think it's always fascinating, and I see I've got children of my own now, and you see all kids having that dream of becoming a professional football player, and actually it's harder to become a professional footballer than it is to get into Oxford or Cambridge, and so the odds of actually achieving that dream is unfortunately few and far between. But I think my personal journey always was faced with adversity. Like, I suffered adversity in the release from Arsenal, adversity suffering major surgeries, major injuries on my ACL. And I think that willingness to continually show up sort of was embedded in my DNA early on. And I think if I hadn't have had those injuries, if I hadn't have had that rejection from Arsenal, I certainly wouldn't have had the mentality that I sort of have now and have taken into the business world, which is as fierce and as competitive as elite sports, to ultimately be as successful as you can be individually. So.
What was the conversation when Arsenal let you go?
So I sat down with Liam Brady as a 15-year-old. I'd been at Arsenal for 5 years, loved every minute of it. It was during the period of the Invincibles. It was when Arsene Wenger really brought that level of excellence into British football in terms of standards outside of football off the pitch. And Liam Brady sat me down as a 15-year-old. He was head of the academy at Arsenal, and he said that we simply don't think you're tall enough or strong enough to play in this first team. And I was a late developer. I was relatively short at 15, was relatively spindly as well, didn't have much muscle on my body. So I completely understand where he was coming from. But yeah, he said, you're released and you can begin looking at opportunities at other clubs. There's obviously no guarantees. You'll have to go on trial potentially. But that's the end of the line and end of the road at Arsenal. And
how were you at that moment?
It was, I still remember it now, and it was a surreal experience because you sort of go into it thinking, okay, what's the next chapter? Maybe another 2 years. And as you get to 15, you begin to talk about scholarships and professional contracts. So I personally wasn't expecting it. It was quite a shock. And actually, I remember leaving that room, and I was with my father, and my father obviously drove me to and from all training sessions. And after 10 minutes of driving in the car, my dad had to pull over because I was, in tears, and was unconsolable. And it was, a very difficult moment. And it was almost like, well, where do you go from here? Like, what's the next steps?
Did Arsenal give you no backup?
It's difficult. I think they make other clubs aware that you are available. And I think, again, the whole system, the academy system, there are still massive gaps in the academy system. Boys will get released and almost disappear from professional football without any help from the club, from the Footballers Association, from the FA, from the Premier League. I think Crystal Palace have recently done some really good initiatives in terms of building a framework around boys who have been released, but it's nowhere near where it should be. And the reason why is because it's such a competitive industry. As soon as you release a boy, you're looking for the next talent. You're looking for the next, Jack Wilshere, or the next, whoever it is coming through at that academy. And so there's very little time and very little space for real care for people and players. And unfortunately, for me, I think it's just a part of the industry and how it's been built and what it's currently
Did
like.
any of your age group go on to get into Arsenal's first team?
So out of my age group, and I probably saw 4 to 5 boys come and go every year that I was in professional or in the academy system. So from 10 to 15, I'd probably seen 25, 30 players come and go. I was obviously one of them that eventually went. But if you factor that across a period of a decade where a lot of players will be in academy systems all the way through, in my year, of all of the players that I played with at Arsenal, there was only one who played in the Premier League, one who played internationally, and one who effectively had a career in professional football, and that was me. So of all of the 15 or so boys that stayed at Arsenal in that year, none of them actually broke through, and it shows how competitive and tough it is.
We had Jay Bothroyd as a guest, and he would have been just before you, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
And then he had a different journey, and he made it. He was an international footballer and played in the Premier League and didn't play for Arsenal. So
Exactly.
And just a football word on that. That Arsenal Invincible team were a very big physical side. And Arsenal, after that, went kind of small. And Arsenal now, going for, as we speak, the quadruple, are a big physical side again, aren't they?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think it always, there's cycles, and it will always be driven by the direction of the club and the culture and philosophy that the club is trying to implement, and there's different ways to win a football game. There are lots of different ways. And I think, you just have to be, as always, timing is key. And if you're at the right club with the right management, with the right culture and philosophy, you tend to have an opportunity. And that's eventually what I did have with Reading Football Club, under Steve Coppell, very much around, players who could really deliver in terms of intensity and repeated activity, and whether it was running the channel or being able to cover distance. And that was always one of my strengths. And as I began to get back into playing and training after the injuries I had, that was a massive strength of mine, which allowed me to break into Reading's first team.
Just before we get on to Reading, you mentioned about Oxford and Cambridge with some comparison to football. I mean, you were very bright at school. Was there an alternative at that time? Were your family pushing you towards a stay in education and come through away from sport and do something completely different?
Yeah, there was always the intention for me to have, to continue my education and, look into degrees. But I was so headstrong about professional football, I sort of made the decision for myself. And so, I found school relatively enjoyable. I sort of passed a lot of my studies without having to do a massive amount of work, because I would just have a football everywhere I went. But I very much made the decision that actually I didn't feel a degree at any level was going to benefit me in the direction I was going.
Were you called Hal at school?
Yeah, so it was Hal is my sort of pet name. So my middle name's Henry, so Thomas Henry, and my grandmother named me Hal. So it was sort of like a nickname that I had. But when I went on trial at Arsenal, there was another Thomas on the trial lineup. And so to sort of differentiate and stand out, they said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Hal." Yeah. And so from then, every single football list I was on was Hal Robson-Kanu. So,
Well, this episode of the Joy of Football is in partnership with CVERsports, the home of digital sport, health, and fitness content that's innovative, inclusive, and properly useful. And they will be very interested in how you suffered your ACLs, how they were dealt with, and how you dealt with them.
Yeah, so a lot of people who followed me in my career have no idea that I suffered 2 major ACL ruptures. And when I look back now, it is crazy to think that I went through what I did go through. Firstly, because the first challenge that I had as a 15-year-old, it was a knee-high challenge. I was playing Milton Keynes in the reserves at Reading, and they were fast-tracking me into the first team. There was talk of, Steve Coppell wanting to make me sort of youngest ever player for Reading. So, I was in line for that. And I think it was my second or third reserve team game. The defender decided to teach me a lesson into the second half and came in with a knee-high challenge, and that knee-high challenge ruptured my anterior cruciate ligament, posterior cruciate ligament, medial ligament, damaged all of the cartilage in my knee. And to put things in perspective, my left knee went beyond my right knee, and there was actually a picture of it on the internet after the game, and Reading's director of football had to get it removed. And I was whisked to the hospital, went to see the surgeon, and the surgeon did an arthroscopy where they look inside the knee. It was completely swollen. Like if I tried to put any weight on it, it would just give way. And he said, "Look, you've got quite traumatic damage to your knee. It's very unlikely that you're going to play at the level that you thought you were going to play at. There is a reconstructive surgery, but it's it's going to be very difficult to recover, and you're likely to always live with pain. So you're going to have to get used to playing with pain. And so, as I said, was relatively headstrong, was like, yeah, no, I'm going to go do the surgery. I was like, how long is the recovery? And he said 12 months. That was a massive shock. I was like, goodness me, I'd only ever had an injury for sort of a week or 2 weeks up until that point. And so went through the surgery, went through 12 months of rehabilitation. And as I began to play and train again, I was selected for a academy game. And in the first 5 minutes of that game, the same injury happened. So I ruptured that same knee, same rupture, anterior cruciate ligament.
Was that a twist, a turn, a challenge?
This was innocuous, like it was just a challenge. It wasn't a malicious challenge, but it knocked my knee and my ACL popped, and I felt it at the time. And I was like, I think that feels the same as before, and was taken to the same surgeon. And as I walked into the room, I could see the look on his face. He was almost looking at me thinking, this isn't good. And yeah, he did the same arthroscopy, looked inside the knee and said, your ACL has re-ruptured. You're going to need a reconstructive surgery again. But we need to tell you, you should begin looking at different career paths now, because you will always live with pain. And yeah, I basically was headstrong. I was, naive. Definitely that naivety in me was like, no, my dream is to play in the Premier League. And I remember actually on the hospital bed at that time, post-surgery, I was watching Sky Sports News and I saw Theo Walcott, who was in my year, sort of through the academy ages, and he was at Southampton. He had just been bought by Arsenal for a significant amount, and I was almost like, goodness me, like that could have been me. I was one of the top talents, and I ended up going through that surgery, going through another 12 months of rehabilitation. But as I began to play and train again, everything the surgeon and doctors said came to fruition. So I would wake up in the mornings and my knee was a balloon. I'd go for a jog and I'd have to stop after 10, 15 minutes because the restriction and pain in my knee was simply too much. And it got to a point where I spoke to the physios and doctors at the club and I said, look, I'm really struggling here. Can you please help? And they said, the surgeon told you this was going to be the case. You kind of have to just get on with it. But what we can do is prescribe some anti-inflammatories and painkillers. Yeah. So I began...
There's a limit to how long you can do that.
Correct. And my limit was 2 weeks. So I began taking relatively standard medication, things like diclofenac, ibuprofen, paracetamol. But after 2 weeks, my body had an adverse reaction to them. So I started passing blood in my urine, severe nausea, couldn't sleep. So yeah, real traumatic years of my life. But as I chose to stop taking this standard medication, but was still hampered with this chronic inflammation and restriction, my father and I basically began asking the question, like, there must be a natural way to reduce pain, inflammation, and swelling.
Especially when you're so young as well.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. And so we basically began looking at various different practices, various cultures around the world where they used natural ingredients to reduce pain, inflammation, and swelling, albeit anecdotally, so nothing medicinal, nothing backed by science, but it was anecdotally used to reduce the symptoms that I was experiencing. And we began to come across relatively readily available ingredients. So things like whole watermelon. So not just the flesh, it was the rind and the skin. Wow. Things like pomegranate, pineapple, whole ginger root, and subsequently whole turmeric root. And the information that we were reading, and this was at the public library, 2 decades ago, the internet wasn't what it was, but we've still got some of the books that we used as sources, herbs as medicine and food as functional alternatives to sort of standard medication. And my father basically sourced all of these raw ingredients that we had read at some form or another reduce pain, inflammation, and swelling, and turned them into this blend. And I began consuming this golden elixir after my father had created many different iterations. I was a fussy teenager, so he had to make it taste half decent. These aren't typically ingredients you would consume. Or being
fussy, half indecent.
yeah, half indecent, exactly. Yeah. And so eventually he got it to a format that I could consume consistently, and it was all about consistent use. And yeah, long story short is I used this blend that my father was creating every 4 or 5 days and would leave them in my fridge, consumed it regularly for 6 weeks. And my usual routine was wake up, roll out of bed, head into the bathroom, into the shower. And at that moment in time, I realized in over 2.5 years, that was the first time I woke up without any pain or restriction in my knee. And that was as a 17-year-old. I was able to begin to play and train from that point on. eventually broke into the first team, made my debut. A year later, I made my international debut for Wales. And a year after that, I made my Premier League debut when we got promoted to the Premier League with Reading. And I was able to do all of that completely pain-free.
So we'll come into the actual work with the company in a minute, but what is the blend that's in that jar you brought with you now?
Yeah, so this is one of the original blends that I was consuming that my father made. So inside of here is whole watermelon, so fresh whole watermelon, whole turmeric root, whole ginger root. There's also pineapple, pomegranate, all fresh, all raw. And there's something which we've now sort of trademarked as a Biomax uptake blend. So over 7 different herbs and spices in combination with all of these active ingredients.
So when you say whole, you include the skin?
We do indeed, yeah. So
maybe that's the most important part.
I would likely say so. And again, like the fascinating thing is we've obviously gone massively into, health and wellness and understanding like why have people accepted that it's okay to live in pain? Like no one likes living in pain, but it's almost like when you look at the statistics, there's over 23 million people in the UK who live with pain at any given time. And actually it's almost just accepted as the norm.
That's just their partner.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say that, but I'll say maybe physical pain, not necessarily mental. But yeah,
and a lot of footballers, we always say a professional footballer is never pain free. Really, once you've got into the career,
exactly.
And so obviously,
why? Yeah, exactly. Why? And so it's so fascinating. So that blend is essentially what allowed me to recover from acute pain. But what I then began realizing was throughout my career, I would recover quicker than my teammates. So during preseason, everyone gets hit with DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, muscle pain for 3 or 4 days. I was pain-free within 24 hours. Into winter season, everyone's getting run down, sick, flu is rife in the changing room. I was impervious to the cold. I would never get sick, and I haven't had a cold for 2 decades. And so I was using this religiously as my sort of secret weapon. And yeah, we basically decided a decade later that actually there's nothing truly like this on the market. There's like shots, everyone will have seen sort of the health shots in, sort of local supermarkets and chains where actually the base is apple juice or the base is orange juice or it's even water, and the functional components actually aren't that functional. And so, yeah, we decided to bring it to market, which was a journey in itself.
Well, that's a long way ahead to where we've got to. So, first of all, when you had the second one at Reading, were you not afraid they would just say, "Look, nice to meet you, son. You would have been a good player, but go off and do something else"? Did that ever happen, or was there support total that you could come back again, having lasted 10 minutes after your first reconstruction?
I was 3.5 months away from being released at Reading. That's how close I was. And I was 17. I had signed at Reading on the basis that I would have a professional contract, but nothing was signed. So I signed scholarship terms. And exactly what you said, for 90% of the time that I had been there, I had been on a hospital bed, trying to recover. And so there was a massive question mark. And that question mark wasn't just the club. It was also first team players, it was your teammates, where I was like, well, he simply can't get fit. Like there's no way that he's recovering from what he's gone through. And so, yeah, there was a constant sense of doubt within me during that period of time. And again, like having to live with that and come through that, it really does form you in terms of resilience needed to achieve anything in life. And recovering, that's why I said at the start, like that is my biggest achievement, being able to have recovered and being completely written off. And it was almost like flyaway comments like, oh yeah, he'll get injured in a couple of weeks time, as you're getting back to training, which was a bit of banter, but it really, was a dagger to the heart when you've gone through what I'd gone through.
In ball terms, it's bloody mindedness that you showed, then, that I'm not going to give in to all these things that are happening. And did you surprise yourself with the levels of determination you were able to show?
Yes, yeah. I look back now and I think, why on earth did I do what I did? Like what was, like, obviously, as you said, having a career and going on to achieve what I achieved wouldn't have been possible without going through that. But actually, when I look back, the sleepless nights, evenings, and I'd be lying in my bed and I'd have to cry myself to sleep as a 16, 17-year-old. That's not normal. And you wouldn't, I personally look at that and I think if that was my son, I'd be heartbroken that he's going through that. But I had to go through that in order to, achieve what I eventually was able to achieve.
You dealt with the pain, but you had to deal with the physical changes that the injuries brought you. Were you a different player?
Completely different. Yeah, I was very skillful as a young player, and I liked the ball at my feet all of the time, and I would sort of invite challenges as a player and as a winger and sort of like off the striker. But the time that I spent off the football pitch in terms of the recovery and recuperation I was going through, I also worked physically on my body. So when I came back as a 17-year-old and was eventually able to begin playing and training again, my stature had completely changed. My shoulders had broadened. I had muscle on my limbs now, and I was a very different player to what I was, and that sort of showed up in the career path that I had of being a sort of number 9 who could then run channels, or a winger who was relatively industrious and not necessarily skillful, and wanted to beat a man.
When you came, I was covering obviously Reading at those times, and you were always down as a winger, and then I see you with a number 9 shirt on a few years later. So in a way, that sort of emphasised the trend. When was the moment, the debut? You finally got onto the pitch as a Football League player, Premier League player. When was that?
So it would have been, I made my debut under Brendan Rodgers for Reading's first team. So he'd left as academy manager, went to Chelsea, then went to Watford, and then came to Reading. And it was that breakthrough season. I'd spent maybe 6 or 9 months on loan at Southend and Swindon, which was a great experience, and certainly toughened me up and allowed me to get back into playing post the injuries.
So your debut wasn't actually made for Reading. You'd made your debut elsewhere.
Yeah, so I made my debut so I went on loan for sort of 9 months in that bridging period as I was coming back from the injuries. Yeah. And I was sort of on the brink of the first team, but the question was, can he stay fit? Has he actually recovered? And so I had to prove myself in that sense, and came back to Reading and made my debut under Brendan. And that would have been 2009, 2008, maybe 2007.
Probably, was that in the Championship?
Yeah, in the Championship. Yeah. And Brendan then left, and then Brian McDermott came in, and that was when they really focused on the youth of Reading, and we had a great squad and young players coming through. And we had great success under Brian McDermott. We got through to the playoff final against Swansea, where Brendan was actually manager. So he had left Reading and gone to Swansea.
How was that game?
Yeah, and so had to deal with that disappointment.
4-2.
But the following year we obviously went on to win the Championship and get promoted to the Premier League, which was a special moment.
Reading are not Arsenal. What was the environment like?
I would say it was a nice club, but it was very ambitious, and so they had a really good structure under John Medeski, and I often
the chairman owner,
and I often say, like, having had a chance now to sort of step away from football and look at football impartially, completely, you can see the success or failure of a club by the ownership of that, team. And it always starts at the top. And actually, this is, rife across business anyway. It always starts with the ownership and the direction and the culture that the owners set. And I think when you look at teams now who are going through, rough patches or not achieving the success that maybe fans think they should be achieving at whatever level, whether it's Premier League, Championship, or through the ranks, it's always set by the tone of the ownership. And if the ownership is clear in their vision, they are willing to invest, not just commercially, invest into the structure, invest into the people, the team around the team. You get that sense, and that's those are the fundamentals of any successful team. And so, yeah, my point is at Reading, John Medeski, he was a visionary, and he had created his own wealth and wanted to share that with Reading as a, as a collective town and, region of the UK. And actually that really came through with the infrastructure of the club, and not only the stadium, but, the training ground, and then obviously making sure that the backroom staff were well equipped to service that first team and academy system. And it was great. And we had some really successful times at Reading. We punched above our weight. We probably could have done better at certain points and periods of time, but the years that I had there, particularly under John Medeski, I think, were really fond.
And got you into international football.
Precisely.
How did all that come about? When were you English and when did you become Welsh?
Yeah, exactly. So I'd always been on the verge of England's youth ranks from, sort of under 14s. I sort of had a sniff, but didn't quite come through. Under 15s was sort of on the periphery of the England group. Obviously had my 2.5 years of injury and surgery. But as I began to come back and play and train again, I was then invited to the England under 18s, under 19s and under 20s. And Brian Eastick was one of the main coaches there at the time. And I was very much in that group of, Daniel Sturridge and Jordan Henderson was there, and Andy Carroll, Danny Welbeck, and, Jack Cork. And I just remember a really great group of players. And I was playing in the Championship as a 19-year-old at Reading and was performing really well. And once you get to international under 20s, the under 21s is, if you break into the under 21s, that means, you're likely going to have a really good career and you've got an opportunity to get into the first team. And I was overlooked by England under 21 squad. And I felt I should have really been in there. And throughout that period of time, the under 21s manager at Wales, Brian Flynn, had been messaging me, had been emailing me. I'd be at games and he'd be waiting there after a game and he'd say, "Well done, Hal, you did really well. Like, great to see you again. Have you thought about Wales?" And so he was always wanting to speak to me about this group that Wales were creating. And I kind of entertained it a little bit, but it wasn't really something I'd thought deeply about. I was in sort of England's youth systems and I was sort of continuing with that. But my grandmother was Welsh and I'd always mention it to her. "Oh yeah, I could also play for Wales." And it was sort of something we as a family spoke about. But it was only really after being overlooked at that under 21 level where I sort of went home and Brian Flynn called me as he did and, managed to get through to me. I was like, "I've seen you've not been called up and can we come and meet? And, we'd love to talk to you about what we're doing here, as a nation of Wales." And yeah, I sort of had the time with him and he really shared the vision of what he was creating. He'd had the foresight of what we went on to achieve. Like back then, it's quite, surreal.
Presumably you've been to Wales.
Yeah, we'd holiday in Wales. Yeah, we'd holiday in Wales.
Ritchie of I think was probably playing on the south coast then. Yeah. Had never been to Scotland. He got called up to.
Yeah. So, it was actually, how Brian Flynn actually found out I was Welsh. It was when I was 17. So before the sort of England youths at the under 18s and under 19s, and Brian Flynn was visiting one of the other Welsh players in my team at Reading, Simon Church, and he was in the canteen, and I used to holiday in Wales. So we'd holiday in Tenby every year as a family.
Beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful. And it had broken, it got wind because Steve Coppell had asked me during pre-season. He said, "Where did you go on holiday?" And I said, "To Tenby, to Wales." And Steve Coppell had let it slip to the first team that I holidayed in Wales. So it became a bit of where the usual lads would be out in, Ibiza or, some party island. I was going to Wales. So it was a bit of a running joke for the first team, which was fine. But Brian Flynn walked into the canteen and Glenn Little and Stephen Sidwell were in the canteen and they saw Brian Flynn, knew he was obviously the under 21s Welsh manager. And they said, hey, why don't you talk to Hal? He holidays in Wales. He's Welsh. And so Brian Flynn immediately turned to me and was like, Are you Welsh? Are you Welsh? And I said, oh, funnily enough, yeah, I am Welsh. My grandmother was born in Caerphilly. And so it was that moment on, that was when he was saying, look, come and join us. And yeah, as I said, made that decision, had a conversation with my grandmother and with my whole family. And yeah, we made the decision to move allegiances and commit to Wales. And I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, I mean, that night in Lille.
Well, let's build up to it. Because first of all,
there was dressing room footage from social media about Wales and England, wasn't there, in that tournament?
Yes, there was.
Were you a part of that? Or?
I actually wasn't.
Imagine you were.
I actually wasn't. Yeah, I think I missed that one, thankfully. But yeah, no. I remember making I think I played under 20s for Wales and then made my under 21s debut. And was fast tracked into the first team, and I think I made my debut that summer. It was away to Croatia under John Toshak, and yeah, it was a very special moment for me. I think it was surreal, happened so quickly, but all of a sudden I was an international player as a 20 or 21-year-old.
What position did you play?
So I came on the wing. So I came on left wing. And yeah, I remember playing against or trying to get the ball off Luka Modric, and I was like, "Oh, that's difficult to do."
Trying to do that now.
I was like, "That's the level you need to get to."
Talk to us about the actual qualification procedure into the Euros in 2016.
Yeah, so it was when I began playing for Wales. We were ranked 124th in the world. It was something crazy, and I remember going to games where you were playing against minnows and you'd do well to get a draw or get a win, and we went through a few years of real hard yards in terms of understanding what standard is required at an international level. But the biggest and most pivotal moment was Gary Speed coming in as manager, and he came in and he brought a new standard which a lot of the players were used to at their clubs or at Premier League or Championship level, but that wasn't actually there. Wales as a rugby nation, football was a secondary thought, and that was everything from the infrastructure, to the resource they allocated it. But Gary Speed came in and it literally changed overnight. It was like walking back into, Arsenal's system. Everything's immaculate. Balls are prepared. Training is literally a military operation where everyone knows what they're doing at the right time, and that professionalism, that standard, and that benchmark leveled everyone up. And very quickly we were beginning to get success. We were competing against some of the bigger nations. We were getting results. I think we went on a 7-game winning run, and we had that momentum to build as a squad and as a team. And obviously the passing of Gary Speed was very difficult for all of the players. We were all very young, and
for everyone in football.
And it was a moment where it as a group and as a group of players, like, it brought us genuinely closer together. And in his memory of his spirit and memory, we were able to channel that. And actually, what we needed was that sense of direction. And Chris Coleman, took the mantle. And when I look back, actually, it was so brave of him to step in during that time and say, look, I'm going to continue to lead this nation and take that mantle forward, which Gary Speed had left. And he did that. And it took a few months and a period of time to get back into where we were previously, but we began to click again, and we really found that momentum, which allowed us to ultimately qualify for a first ever major tournament for us as a group, and for the nation for over 50 years.
It was amazing. I mean, I was fortunate enough to do, when they qualified for the 2022 World Cup, the Ukraine playoff game, and the sort of operatic noise from the crowd. It was incredible. And that's it's very much in passing, but we did do it on the podcast. My great grandmother is Welsh, from Mid Wales, from Welsh Pool.
My grandmother's Welsh.
Well, there you go.
Amazing. There we go. Yeah.
But we had Mickey Thomas on talking about, and my great grandmother was a Thomas, so I've been trying to work out whether Mickey and I are related. There are quite a lot of Thomases in Wales.
Can I just ask one thing
yeah,
here?
of course you can.
You were a winger. Wales had some great wingers. Wales had some great players. I mean, we go back to Jeremy Charles, but I mean, obviously Ryan
Jeremy
Giggs.
Charles. I go back to John Charles.
John Charles. I mean,
Jeremy be thrilled to be mentioned.
John Charles. You played with Gareth Bale. How good was he?
Yeah, he was one of the best players in the world for a decent amount of time. I think I really realised how good he was under that season at Tottenham under Andre Villas-Boas, and he scored that goal at Upton Park and top corner, and that season he was taking his standard to another level, and it wasn't just one-off moments. Like, it was a benchmark and baseline that he had set. So much so that in training, I remember we were preparing for an international game, and you normally play a 11v11 on a really tight pitch the day before a game. And he had dropped into the, dropped off the centre half and was in a space, in a pocket, probably a metre square and there were 4 players around him. And I was sort of his competitor. I was the number 9, so I was sort of to the side. And Neil Taylor, who was the left back, has fizzed the ball into him, into this tiny pocket. But the ball wasn't a flush ball. It was sort of waist height. And within a millisecond, he's pivoted, shifted his body, lifted his foot up and killed the ball dead, sort of waist height. And the ball just dropped down while he was in between 4 players, and he had already shifted on a sixpence and was facing the goal and managed to get a shot off. Didn't score, but I just remember thinking, goodness me, that is absolutely electric. So yeah, he was doing that. And for me, he is one of, if not the best British, export we have ever had. For what he achieved was incredible during a time where we've had the Ronaldos, the Messis, and later on the Neymars and Mbappes. Like, he's fully up there.
What was the mentality? Now you qualified in the tournament in France, and you were in your group, and England are in the group as well. But there are other, I don't want to labour that point. But what did you think as a group going into it? I mean, compared to where you actually got to in the end, was there that kind of ambition?
I think it's fascinating because we actually went into there. The pressure that we had was definitely put on by ourselves. We were saying, look, we want to do well in this tournament, but there wasn't necessarily any external pressure. And the power of that going into a major tournament, I think, is there for all to see. Because when you look at England, when they go into a major tournament, like, immediately it's expectation, it's pressure, everything's external pressure. And we simply didn't have that. And so we were there to genuinely enjoy it. We had already achieved something great in qualifying. And so we were almost heroes already. But actually, it was now about how far could we get to. And so I think that does speak volumes in terms of, the mentality going into major tournaments or major competitions, of almost being able to play free without pressure. It has a massive amount of benefits, and yeah, that's basically what we did with the nation, and we were able to achieve some incredible things.
Martin,
I've got
talk us through the quarter-final goal.
Well, it defies description, really. I mean,
well,
that was a mixture, I think, of you being a centre forward and a winger. Would that be fair?
I think that's a good assessment.
Because you had your strength. And poor Thomas Meunier, I bet he never watches it again.
Exactly.
You did really put him on toast, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then, what I was so impressed about now, watching it back again, was when, having created brilliant, the real wow about it was the manoeuvre. But then you still had to finish. And the finish is so accomplished and so confident. I mean, you made it look the easy part. I mean, go on, you've been through it many times. Share it with us.
Yeah, no, I think if we work backwards, being one-on-one with Courtois in any given instance, he is massive. He feels that goal. And I remember just thinking, low and hard. I needed to get it low and hard, and it didn't go that low, but it did go hard. So into the corners, and it was after that is a blur. But I do remember sort of seeing as the ball came across from Aaron Ramsey, I was aware that Neil Taylor was, in a lot of space on the outside, and I think he might have been able to have got a shot off, or he was going to cut it back across the goal. And so my touch was sort of in that direction. So the momentum of, the entire field was heading that direction. And I just remember thinking, okay, well, I might be able to create some space here. And I would always do Cruyffs in training matches and some games, just to get yourselves out of tricky positions. And I was like, Cruyff could work here. And so I did it. And
so it was process thought.
Well, I wouldn't say it was definitely. There was a massive element of instinct around it, but looking back, like that was the instinct that you were sort of experiencing at that moment in time, or I was, and it just allowed me to create a massive amount of space inside of the opposition's penalty box, which you should never have, and it was a special moment
because the ball's coming in, and you think, well, I've got a problem to solve here. What's best for me, for the team, whatever. So there must have been a fraction where you thought this could be the way to do it, as it turned out. And that is when you talk about games played and how people react in certain situations. The actual process can never be replicated, really.
Never.
I'm sure that technology there'll be something like the GPS thing on it that'll tell your thought process on it. But it is a mixture of I suppose, repetition, muscle memory, belief. And it all came together. I have to say this: the jubilation was worthy of the goal. By the way. We were all the commentators were going crazy about it, and fair to say, I think you were as well.
We were as well. Yeah, we were on cloud nine, definitely. But it was, it took us to 2-1 in the game. But we were very aware that wasn't the end, and we dug deep. We had to, and. Eventually, Sam Vokes actually got the third goal, which was nice. And we were able to celebrate getting through to the semi-finals.
I seem to remember saying, this is a player who hasn't got a club.
Indeed.
Is that made it? I mean, we do get this from time to time with tournaments in the summer. Players have released, or have they had to sign, like Trent Alexander-Arnold had to sign a contract to move from playing the Club World Cup. And all these things do happen. But then it was pretty unusual. So somebody scored a most glorious goal, the goal of the tournament, and went in for the Puskas Award and all that stuff, and not got a club. So how did it come? This is getting back more serious now, isn't it? How did it come to that?
Yeah, so as I said, I think I had been at Reading for nearly a decade by that time, and had played obviously in the Premier League with them, had really good successes, and was in the Championship with them at the time. And I think my personal sort of view was that Medeski had moved on, there was different ownership, and the club was, for me, going in a different direction of where I wanted to go in my career. And I would have loved for Reading to have been able to continually invest into the squad and really push for promotion, which I personally felt is where we should have been with the group of players that we had at that moment in time. And so I made the decision essentially to run my contract down at Reading. We had negotiations, but it was clear that the club didn't have any ambition of wanting to get back into the Premier League. And actually, again, looking back in hindsight, nearly 10 years on, I think my what I was feeling at that moment in time was clearly the truth. Because
well, can we just talk about that? Because Reading were in the first decade and a half of this century as much a Premier League team as they were a Championship team, really.
Yeah.
And they've gone down again. They're League One team. They're going to be lucky to stay there.
I saw them play 3 weeks ago at Wimbledon, actually. They have got Jack Marriott scoring a lot of goals for them, which is, I think he got a hat-trick today at the weekend. But they lost.
Yeah.
And you could see that wasn't the Reading that I knew in your time and before.
What's gone wrong?
Yeah, but to my point earlier, for me, it's the ownership. If the ownership isn't right, if they're not setting the vision, if they're not willing to invest in the club, into the infrastructure, into the players, give the manager the backing that they need. And it's not always about, bringing in players. It's about, how they care for the players that they have, how do they look after their key players? How do they, how are they creating avenues and channels for, the top talents within the academy system to really come through and reward the players who are contributing at that time with success, and it shifted in the decade that I had been at Reading. By the time I left, I knew that wasn't the club that I had joined, a decade earlier. And so, yeah, I made the decision to move on, and it was a tough one. Not a lot. The fans certainly didn't like my decision. Particularly leaving on the free as an academy player. We had offers over the many years for me, which were rejected, and so, I think it was the right thing for me to do in my career. And yeah, personally, I love the club, and I believe it is a club which shouldn't be where it is today. Like, I still believe it is a top championship, if not, Premier League team with the right investment.
Did you know where you were going?
I had, there was a lot of talk around clubs and interest, and I sort of had conversations with managers. There was a lot of interest from, the likes of Hull. West Brom had obviously made me aware that they were interested. And my aim was to get back into the Premier League. I didn't want to go internationally. I wanted to get into a Premier League squad and team and club, which, I could believe I could really contribute towards. And yeah, I went into that tournament on a free without a club. I would not recommend it, because if you pick up an injury, there's almost no going back. You're putting yourself at a massive disadvantage.
Especially with your history.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. So I was, but I was confident in my ability. I believed in, I was making the right decision at that moment in time. And yeah, I think obviously the goal and the success of what we achieved as a nation certainly springboarded the awareness of my position and
strengthened your negotiating position.
And it created a lot of opportunities internationally. And as I said, unfortunately, it wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I was never going to go internationally. Just a personal decision. But yeah, it allowed me to ultimately move to West Bromwich Albion and move under Tony Pulis and have some good success under him.
So West Bromwich Albion, you got back in the Premier League.
Yeah, and that was the goal. And was really, grateful for the opportunity. Joined the club with some really great professionals. The likes of Darren Fletcher, Johnny Evans, Ben Foster, and yeah, it felt good to be back at that level. And yeah, sort of looking back at my time at West Brom, I certainly feel I contributed during key moments there, and really loved my time there at the same time. Tony Pulis.
What was your role? Were you the provider, or were you?
No, I was number 9. Into the channels.
So
into the channels. So it was about wearing down the opposition. Run their legs off. He used to say to me. But it was good. Like I really enjoyed my time under Tony Pulis. I feel you knew where you stood with him, and
especially at set pieces.
And if you did what he asked, he'd reward you. And that's what I did.
But you weren't 6'8".
No, I was 6 foot and a little bit, but I could certainly run a channel or two. So I used that as my
Did you do any blocking at the corners?
Yeah, that was all part and parcel of it. So you'd spend as much time on the training pitch as you would do set pieces. But when you look at the amount of games that are won and lost,
he was ahead of his time in a way, wasn't he?
Exactly. So yeah.
Same question really with West Brom. They're in a dip in their history. What do you think caused that?
Yeah, I think they've definitely had lots of changes of ownership, and they probably don't have the clarity of direction of a club that size should really have. Again, my final game there was in the summer of 2021 away at Leeds in the Premier League. I scored, but we got relegated under Sam Allardyce, and that was my final game in professional football. But again, that sort of sense of the direction of the club, it was sort of selling the best players, wasn't looking to hold on to or fight for the players that could really keep delivering success for them. And yeah, I think when that's the case, the club has to go through a period of transition, and that's what it's been going through over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. So,
Did you know it was your final game?
um, I think deep down inside, I knew because by this time it was 3 years of having set up and was running the business alongside playing professional football, and the business was growing and growing at a relatively fast rate. We were helping a lot of people through the power of our range in terms of natural nutrition and an alternative to sort of standard medication, reducing pain, inflammation, swelling. And yeah, I kind of made that decision. I wouldn't say knowingly, but I kind of made the decision unknowingly that actually I just wanted to focus on what we were doing at the Turmeric Co. And our vision of ultimately changing the future of society's health through a natural product. And I think when you look back at history, that hasn't necessarily been done before. So by this time in 2021, we'd probably had maybe 2,000 or 3,000 life-changing testimonials. And when you talk about scoring the winner or great goals, actually when you receive a life-changing testimonial of a product that you've brought to market, I think it's as rewarding, if not more rewarding, than scoring a professional goal in a competitive
Wow, that's saying
competition.
something. That is saying something.
Yeah, it is. And so I was committed from that point on fully on the Turmeric Co, and we were going through lots of growth. So
having an idea and pursuing that idea and perfecting your product and starting and running a successful business are two completely different qualities. I know you married, didn't you, into a family that had a very successful business in Scotland. Where did you learn your business, and how did you learn your business? And all right, you were not a poor man, you were a Premier League footballer, but where did you get your funding?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question. I would say everything that I've learned has been self-taught when it comes to business. Like, and it's almost like the goal was, how can we get this product, which was a homemade remedy, which was had helped me, my family's lives by that point in time, and make that available to anyone in any location at any time. And so the route to doing that is probably too long to cover on a podcast. It's been some journey since we launched in 2018, but we had to fundamentally set up our own manufacturing capability. We had to set up our own distribution channels, our own supply chain. We had to set up our own route to market, so everything sales, direct to consumer, into retail. It needed a strategy behind everything. It needed focus and execution. And yeah, I was obsessed with it. So as CEO and founder of the business, I was into the detail and was building the business brick by brick. And every positive testimonial that we had, fueled that fire. It gave, me and my team, more passion to go through the challenges that we obviously have had to have gone through to get to where we are today. And, this range, the Turmeric Co range, is a range that obviously I fully believe in is helping, thousands of people daily. But every time we win more shelf space or we, deliver a marketing campaign, like that's against the established, sort of food and beverage, businesses of what we've all grown up with. And actually my personal, mission is actually changing the way that we have perceived and use food, and nutrition. Like, it should be medicine, but for whatever reason, we've sort of disconnected the two of nutrition and food and health. Like, they are intrinsically tied together, and I'm living proof of that. I had to go away from sort of standard medication to natural foods in order to heal. And that's what this range did for me. And so, yeah, we're really passionate about that. And I think that's what has driven a large part of building a business to the, size and volume and the potential that we now have today. And our vision is that, in 10 years' time, turmeric is actually prescribed by the NHS, and the
Has it
question.
really come from your dad and you sitting down when you were 17
Yeah.
and eating all these different roots and various natural products
Yeah.
to what's in that bottle in front of you now?
Yeah.
It's amazing. How have you sort of worked on the ingredients, the recipe of it? I mean, when you're starting from scratch and just to say, well, I'm pain-free today because I had this bit of melon skin or something like that. I mean, it does seem extraordinary that you've been able to sort of professionalize it, if you like.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Like, in the biggest thing and our biggest focus is the product quality. Without that same quality that I had as a teenager, this product wouldn't be what it is today. We wouldn't be helping people day in and day out. And so those were the fundamentals. So we built our manufacturing to a BRC AA plus manufacturing standard, the highest standard of food manufacture. A lot of brands and businesses, they don't have to do that, but it was a prerequisite for us. Then in terms of the route to market, the channels, the supply chain, like we were just constantly obsessed with everything, so much so that now, I'm living and breathing it as if it's normal, but actually it probably is very abnormal to the majority of people. But the benefit of that is that we're able to deliver a product at volume and have it sit on supermarket shelves next door to the biggest beverage and food manufacturers and brands in the world. And we're incredibly proud about that because, we fundamentally believe ours is pretty unique and different.
Is it sorry, then after you.
How much did you have to invest? And how much did you have to get investment?
Yeah, so in terms of the business, like from startup and the initial phases, like I've funded the business with over £1 million of my own money to get it off the ground, and that was over a 3-4 year period. That was the manufacturing capabilities, it was the team, it was the resource around to try and build this business. But
how much of a risk was that to you financially?
Yeah, it was a risk. Like, that's a lot of money to anyone at any level. I think £10,000 is a lot of money to invest in an endeavor with no guarantee. And actually, when you think about turmeric and shots and the health space, there's shots in various different stores, which, as I said before, are apple juice and orange juice. So actually, how can we really cut through that noise and really show people the difference that this product has versus the market? And actually, we did that through science. We invested into clinical research. We have a lead research scientist within the business, and we published independent studies which show a 75% reduction of inflammation, blood markers, 73% improvement in gut permeability, and all of these, markers where actually we're going to rely on data to support the product that we deliver. And that product is unique to us because we manufacture it. So the fascinating thing around the consumer goods space is that the majority of products that you see on shelf, although will be different brands, are actually Me Too products. They're actually all manufactured in a handful of manufacturing sites, down the same line. And so that uniqueness for us is really, one of the foundational building blocks of what we're creating.
Did you have to get medical, the medical side of it to come with you as well? And obviously, if one other way of spreading the business is to have it recommended as a cure for this kind of pains that you suffered yourself. How's the medical profession seen it, or is that something still to come?
Yeah, it's definitely still evolving. I think it is fascinating, because if you go back millennia, you have the famous quote by Hippocrates, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." But actually, when you fast forward to modern living and Western society and Western diets, you actually aren't allowed to call food medicine. So it's a really interesting space. But what we're seeing now in terms of healthcare is actually it's going full circle. So there is functional medicine as an approach to preventative healthcare as opposed to treatment-based healthcare. So a lot of the world that we've all grown up in has been very much focused on treatment-based healthcare. You have an ailment, you now take this. You now have another ailment on top of this, you now take this. And you just stack on treatments across all ailments that people experience, as opposed to actually taking a step back and saying, well, how do you actually build a preventative healthcare system which prevents the majority of ailments driven by inflammation, pain, chronic ailments that we all see as the norm today, it shouldn't be the norm. And that's the question that we're asking, like, why is it? And how do you actually get back to a place where, 23 million people in the UK aren't living with pain as if it's normal? So, yeah.
And what's football's reaction to it? I mean, you've obviously got a few ins there, haven't you?
Yeah. It's been fascinating. We've had to turn down a lot of partnerships and requests for products. But I think in the football environment and in any sporting environment, they are acutely aware of high performance, and fine margins at that level are massive. Games are won and lost, seasons are won and lost on fine margins. And so the product that we have and deliver is not a fine margin product. It delivers a step change in recovery, in healing, in performance potentially. And so we've had a lot of traction of sports teams and clubs requesting and using our product. I think we did an estimation a couple of weeks back, and I think around 4,000 elite athletes use our range on a daily basis now, which again, is phenomenal and amazing when I think about it and sort of take a step back. But for me, it's not about the elite athlete. It's the everyday person who is, struggling with their health, is looking for a solution, an option to, being the best version of themselves. And as I said, health and nutrition is intrinsically tied, and that's what we've delivered.
How proud is your dad for all this?
Yeah, he is a bit of a guru when it comes to natural products, and he certainly delivered this in for me 2 decades ago, and he's delivered a lot since then. We've expanded a lot of what we do. We have hydration. We're looking at, sort of protein and fiber-based products through our manufacturing capability. But I think we're very passionate about bringing natural, functional products that actually heal and make a difference to people to market. So he's very proud.
It is amazing, out of adversity, the pain you went through and how you got through those 2.5 years. Good to only really, because that would have discouraged 99% of the population, certainly 99% of people who wanted to be footballers, I think. And from that has come a future, and you will be the envy of many of your contemporaries, because there are a lot of ex-footballers who are not happy with life after if you like, when the spotlight falls off them.
When the daily football world,
the adrenaline rush. Maybe you should put some adrenaline in.
All natural, Martin.
But you know what I'm saying, and you found it. And for you to say, I mean, I was only a non-league player, but I was a centre forward. I was a number 9, and scoring a goal is still an unreplicatable feeling. I've obviously been doing the podcast doesn't do that, despite Neil's best efforts. So for you to say that it's something that's taken you beyond. Alan Shearer was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he said, this is a couple of years ago, and he'd been retired, 15 years or something like that. He'd never found anything in life, anything that replicated the feeling of scoring a goal. So you have said something that he would be amazed about, and obviously broadcasting doesn't help. I know only too well, but it is. I say it's an example because it's a hard example to follow, but in general point that there are pathways after football, and if you give it your best shot, very bad pun, you can find something that takes you beyond that wonderful world of football.
No, appreciate that, Martin. But I think it's we're certainly not stopping. So probably don't give myself a lot of time to sort of take a step back and think about what we have done, because what we see is a future world which we're creating now is really exciting. And as I said, I think I'm fortunate enough to have found something that I'm as passionate about as football, and the joys that gave to me and gave to others, as well as fans during periods of success and triumph. So I think watch the space. We're definitely just getting started, and we're helping a lot of people, which is my driver.
Watch the space and watch the goal on YouTube.
And where do we find it?
You can find it online. Just type in the Turmeric Co into Google. We're on Amazon. We're direct to consumer. We've set up the business in a way where we make sure that people have access to the product within 24 hours, and We're in major retailers such as Sainsbury's and Tesco's, which we're incredibly proud of. But yeah, we're just getting started on the journey, and there's a lot more to achieve. There's a lot of education that we need to deliver. There's a lot of growth that we feel. If there's £26 billion of costs to the NHS due to inflammation, chronic pain and ailments, and actually what would happen if every single person had access to a Turmeric Co shot every single day, it would be a very different world we lived in.
Hal Robson-Kanu, what a wonderful guest. Also a pundit, of course, on television. So sit there and you can be a pundit on Martin Tyler's letter from the gantry.
Letter from the gantry.
Thanks, Neil. Hal, I hope you've got a couple of minutes to take this not very seriously. This week's commentary deliberations could carry the subtitle VAR, but this time standing for Video Absence Reviewed. It could apply, of course, to every FA Cup tie played this season, from the first preliminary round in August right up to February's fourth round proper. It certainly applied to my assignment in the final round before the technology is permitted where possible. It comes in for round 5, the last 16 of this most loved knockout competition. You may have guessed that for the FA's world transmission, I covered Aston Villa versus Newcastle United. Two clubs with an enviable history, including 7 and 6 FA Cup triumphs respectively, but none since the 1950s. It had all the ingredients for a cracker of a cup tie, and it didn't disappoint. But in the final analysis, was that because it was a VAR-free zone, or did the officials get lucky? Newcastle scored 3 goals, despite 3 key decisions going against them, all of which I believe would have been changed had reviews been available. The first involved Aston Villa taking the lead after 14 minutes. Morgan Rogers paced out an apparent run-up to fire a free kick directly at the Newcastle goal. Douglas Luiz, wandering back from the goal, seemed irrelevant, but going past the ball, he suddenly spun and clipped it into the box, where Tammy Abraham provided a smart finish. His first goal at the start of his second spell at Villa Park. The first began 7.5 years earlier. Incidentally, Douglas Luiz is also starting a second spell, but was only allowed to participate in this game because of a new FA Cup regulation this season, permitting representation in the competition for 2 different clubs in the same campaign. He's now been knocked out in successive rounds, actually, the first with Nottingham Forest at Wrexham. This was another triumph for Villa's bright set-piece coach, Austin McPhee, except that replays showed Abraham was offside. No VAR, goal given. On the stroke of half-time, Luca Digne, captaining the home side, slid in to make a challenge on Newcastle's Jacob Murphy. It was clear in commentary from the moment he made that decision that the ball wasn't going to be involved. The referee, Chris Kavanagh, deemed it a yellow card offence, but the video evidence available to all except the officials showed that it would have been reclassified as red. Murphy was flattened then, and again in added time before the half-time whistle. After a succession of Villa corners with the intent of going in at the break 2 goals to the good, they were left wide open by a counter-attack, which led to Jacob being wiped out by an isolated goalkeeper who was way nearer the halfway line than his own penalty area, Villa's number 2 keeper, Dutchman Marco Bizot. Referee Kavanagh immediately produced a red card for the denial of a goal-scoring opportunity, and though the goal was a long way away, Murphy would have had a free shot. But the replays also emphasised that Bizot's attempt to thwart the Newcastle winger involved serious foul play, another red card offence. Had that come into the officials' thinking, it would have meant a 3-game ban rather than the 1 fixture he'll now be suspended for. As his second choice of the great Emi Martinez, the length of the punishment is probably inconsequential, but it was another episode which would have warranted further scrutiny. So Villa went in at half-time, lucky to have 10 men, but still in the lead. Then another decision went their way, which VAR would have overturned. Digne raised his arm and blocked Kieran Trippier's attempted cross. The handball was clearly inside the penalty area, but instead of a spot kick, a free kick outside the box was awarded, raising the question as well as to whether this should have been a second yellow for Digne, but no sign of it. The eventual restart did lead to a sense of justice finally. The ball eventually broke to Sandro Tonali, without a goal to his name all season, until from the edge of the box and via the back of Douglas Luiz, he levelled the tie. Tonali's second, 13 minutes later, was struck even more sweetly. And Nick Voldemada, on his 24th birthday, wrapped up the Magpies' place in round 5, where, remember, VAR will be an option. Now, I'm not here to change your opinions on VAR. Mine will have been made up long ago. But this game showed what life would be like at the top level if it was shelved. Imagine the reaction had those errors, all to the detriment of Newcastle's chances, led to Villa winning this very significant tie. It could have happened. For the record, recent statistics show that Premier League VAR interventions are fewer than in the top divisions in Spain, Germany, France and Italy, and all three of UEFA's main European competitions. It was Valentine's Day at Villa Park. Asking for love of the technology would be too much, but maybe in its absence, some hearts grew a little fonder for it.
VAR?
Yes, VAR. I think all technology will have its limitations and impacts to ways we've typically done things. So yeah, I think the concept of it is good, but I think there's still a long way for it to really add value to the great game.
It is amazing. I don't normally do this with sort of stuff that's just happened a few days ago, but I was commentating and it was very relevant. Everyone's talking about it still today. But imagine if they would, as I said, if Villa had won and those three things had gone just unresolved, then I think we would be having a much more pro-VAR situation. In a way, I think the officials, when they haven't got VAR, they're not quite what they were before VAR.
Right.
And I think that he's a good referee, Chris Kavanagh. I'm not taking him to task, but he was the one who found it a difficult day.
Well, I was at Hull, obviously, to see Chelsea. And Farai Halam, who made headlines recently, was refereeing first time I've seen him in the flesh. He did okay. He did all right. Interesting guy, because he's big. And I always thought that Howard Webb's size helped him have a presence and authority that certain other referees utterly lacked. And I don't know how you feel about this. Isn't the smallest feeling by me, but I thought Halam got round the pitch well and seemed literally on top of situations which other referees might not.
He was the one who penalty at Man City, Wolves, and he stuck with his decision having been called to the screen in his first ever Premier League game. In a sense, he wasn't taking on Pep Guardiola, but that's how it was perceived. So he stands up tall and is being counted at the moment.
Exactly.
How did you get on with referees? Were you always,
it was.
You were a gentleman.
I think there's always a level of conflict, and confrontation which referees have to deal with. And to your point, Howard Webb, a great example, having that presence, to position themselves on the pitch when you're in the heat of the moment. It's some of the things said I think are borderline in terms of the heat of the moment element of sport, but it's the beautiful game, as crazy as we are. It's part and parcel of it.
We have to explain that even the throwing on the halfway line will be bitterly disputed.
Exactly.
That's the culture, isn't it?
That is the culture.
Talking of presence, having your presence here has been terrific. Hal, thank you so much for making the time and wishing you every success with what is a very exciting venture.
Appreciate it. Thank you,
Brilliant.
Martin.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
From Hal and from Martin.
See ya.